Hello, welcome back to Jive Talk. Today I've got a special guest. It's his third time on Jive Talk. Sturla Ellingvåg is an economist and historian from Norway. He previously talked to me about his role in the large genetic paper published by Nature titled Population Genomics of the Viking World. And he knows a lot about Vikings because he's got a degree in that area of history. He participated also in research to find out about the origin of Rollo of Normandy, and he studied the Normans in his master's research. He's a proud Norwegian, and like me, he bears the paternal haplogroup of I1, which is, as we shall discuss, associated with the grand kings of the Nordic Bronze Age. So, without further ado, welcome back, Sturla.
Hello.
And today is the anniversary of the defeat, the sound defeat of the Viking force led by a Norwegian, Harald Hardrada, at the Battle of Stamford Bridge by the staunch Anglo-Saxon warriors.
Well, Tom, you kind of fooled me on the date. If I had known, I wouldn't have showed up here like this, because Harald Hardrada and his very impressive life, especially down in the Mediterranean, is astonishing, and he was a hero with me. And this day, in my sincere, all sincerity, I believe he was fooled on this day, because there's no coincidence that William the Conqueror, he decided to wait apparently for 2 weeks. And if he hadn't waited for 2 weeks, they would have attacked at exactly the same time, almost from the south and north, splitting England into two. And the decisions he made on that Monday, beautiful warm day, leaving a third of his army behind, and also telling people to take off their armors. I mean, no serious, experienced Viking warrior would do that, Tom. I beg to differ. That's, yeah. Anyways, that's it.
He was a Varangian, wasn't he, in the south?
Yeah. There's actually, and we're actually getting into that because we have so much to talk about, Tom. But I'll tell you, on Sicily, there was a battle of Syracuse in about 1038, and Harald Hardrada was a leader of the Varangian Guard. This is the personal guard of the emperor in Constantinople, right? The Eastern Roman Empire. And they fought with these Lombard princes and warriors, and especially Arduin was the leader of the Lombards, and also the Normans with William Iron Arm. He got his name, Iron Arm, from this battle. But there was also this Greek admiral who commanded everyone, and he was had senior rank. And there's a famous depiction that not too many people know about, Tom, but this has to do with mixing and the cultural closeness that the Lombards shared with the Normans, because we know they intermarried a lot. In like all the Vikings, wherever they settled, they married into the local aristocracy. That was a very good technique to have sort of established themselves as rulers. And we know the Visigoths did that too. They have their own laws. Auric's law code, for example, and Roman laws for the rest of the population. And after this battle, there was a fight over a white horse, which Arduin the Lombard wanted, and he was stripped and beaten and punished in a very bad way by the admiral, because he wanted that white horse. And then, Tom, if you don't know this, what happened after he was humiliated in front of all victorious warriors after his battle? I think it was the next day. Then Harald Hardrada and William Iron Arm, the famous Hotevil son, there were so many brothers, right? The Normans and the Varangians, in solidarity, left immediately together with the Lombards and Arduin in solidarity, right? So it says a lot on the maybe the closeness in culture, or they all share the same roots and knew maybe well, they were able to talk together, that's for sure, but they worked very interestingly together in that century. So I just wanted to share something with the Harald Hardrada. No
And it's
biggie.
so fascinating what you say about the links between the Lombards and the Normans, because although, you know, one was by that stage Italian, Latin speaking, the other French speaking, they both certainly were of common Germanic origin and quite common culture. And some of the genetics is really demonstrating how close that is. We should get to that in a moment, but I just got the largest super chat I've ever received from Joshua Phillips for almost $100. So I should say thank you very much indeed. I finally caught your live. Your channel means the world to me, my friend. It gives me a small glimpse of hope for our future and survival. From San Antonio, Texas. Thank you very much indeed, Josh. Cheers to that. So on the subject, maybe we can segue into. I did a stream the other day about talking about the Anglo-Saxon DNA, and I mentioned a bit about the haplogroup distribution, and you pointed out to me that there is some parallel with some findings from Italy, since we were talking about Italy. Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Maybe we should start there, because I really enjoyed your video, your take on this Anglo-Saxon DNA paper. And Tom, there's been so much this 2022, and it's been a great year.
Yeah, it's been
with
really
so
good.
many good DNA papers, and that's why people like me and yourself, of course, we were able to talk about this in a whole new way, that all the Germanic tribes came out of Scandinavia, including present-day northern Germany. That's something we couldn't really say with definite proof. But with this paper in May, the Ellingvåg paper, with that, there's no doubt, like the Franks and the Alemanni and Svebi and Germani, of course, the Angles and Saxons and Utes and Frisians even, and Lombards, they all, that's the Ellingvåg paper there, yeah. Well, we can say so much more with certainty, and that brings me to, then we can make some interesting parallels, which is what you asked about, right? And I have to tell you, this week I've started doing some of that. Actually, I'm talking a lot about that in Norway at the moment, and a lot of archaeologists are a little bit annoyed with me because I don't talk within the typical way of that you're supposed to talk if you want to talk about history in terms of archaeological boundaries, like an archaeologist. Which I don't, and since I talk with proof of DNA, natural sciences, right, not humaniora, it's a little bit difficult. It's not one theory against the other. We can discuss the evidence, right? And so when we see that in this new Anglo-Saxon paper, they talk about quite a lot of percentages, high percentages of this haplogroup I1, which is sort of like a Scandinavian marker, you might say. At some point, I1 definitely has been in Scandinavia. And we know before the Bronze Age, there was a serious population turnover, meaning all men died actually twice over. That's the Ellingvåg paper. So there's a lot of migrations here. Which is quite interesting, because I, as a historian, my job is to look in the broader sense. And what I see is there are some patterns in every one of these, well, not everyone, but a lot of the migrations that I see. For example, when the Vikings who settled in the 10th century in Normandy, it took them about 100 years before their names was a little bit Frankish. You don't say Francis, more like the Franks, right?
Yeah.
And they had a strong history, of course, the Franks, with in terms of Christianity and the Merovingians and Carolingians, of course, and their empire. So they married into the local aristocracy. And that's what you talked about in your last video, about seeing some probably what was it you call Iron Age French ancestry.
That's what they call it, Iron Age Southern European, but I think that was a bit not an ideal term, because it's specifically not. They say it's mostly Iron Age French. Yeah, sorry, Iron Age French. They did say Iron Age French, but they describe Iron Age French as Southern, which I think is France isn't really South. And
there's no such thing as Iron Age French. I mean, it's Frank. Right, this is before,
or even Iron Age would mean, it could mean Frank or Gaul, so it wasn't fully that's not very illuminating a term, I think, because Franks
No,
and
it was
Gauls aren't the
this
same.
Hugo Capet, I believe it was at the end of the 10th century. No, sorry, yes, the end of 10th century, Hugo Capet, he was the one who sort of like transformed Western Francia into what became France. But then you had Eastern Francia that became Germany, and you had the Middle Francia, which actually became Italy. So you have the three different countries there, right? All from the descendants of the Franks. And they didn't have primogeniture, right? Primogeniture, like the Vikings, the eldest son inherits everything. The Normans have that. But the Franks didn't have that. So when Charlemagne had three grandsons, they all had to inherit Western, Middle, and Eastern Francia. So what we see then is when you have this possible women-mediated, wasn't that the wording you used?
Yeah. He did say they tentatively try to explain the early French-like DNA as potentially female-mediated, but I think that's a little bit premature, because it is possible that the haplogroups of the Franks were Germanic, because they were extremely. I mean, although their autosomal profile was probably very different from Germanic people because they're more southern, their paternal lineages could be very Germanic, look very Teutonic, or kind of, the Frank, they have their origin in the same place as the Angles and Saxons. So it wouldn't be surprising if they weren't distinguishable from the so-called CNE people on the paternal lineages, at least. But or alternatively, there's that what I said in the stream is that what they've suggested in this paper, that potentially it was female mediated, which could be Anglo-Saxons getting French wives. It's not unheard of even today.
It's a cute speculation, but I think that it's fairly obvious if you look on all the other places where Vikings settled, like in the Rus areas. It took about 100 years before their names turned from Ivar into Igor, and they changed the language. Also, we see exactly the same number of years almost in Normandy, but it's this local aristocracy that they obviously married into, just like the Visigoths and the Lombards and the Normans later with the Lombards in Italy. You see it so many times. And of course, when the Normans started pouring into both England and later on into Ireland, because they were ones who became more Irish than the Irish themselves, as the Norman Irish, and of course, all of them had 1 to 2 centuries of intermarrying with local aristocracy among the Franks. So, of course, there's a female component there that they brought back with them. And I think that's fairly obvious. That was a discussion we had at the Viking paper before they kicked me out of that Viking paper and a whole situation down in Copenhagen, because we saw this influx of people back into Scandinavia.
But we discussed that.
Couldn't exactly say when.
Because it was interesting, because they, in the Willestow paper, which you were involved in, that we discussed formally, it does say, like this Anglo-Saxon paper, that there was suddenly in the Viking Age a what they call a Southern European genetic signal. But this one, this so-called Southern Europe, is French. It's coming from France, which isn't really the south of Europe. I'd say it's Western Europe. I mean, I don't personally like to refer to France as Southern Europe, but that's what they're doing in both instances. And you had your own explanation that it was returning Germanic people who had been into France, mixed and then returned into Scandinavia.
Yeah, well, we know they did, and we even have a fairly good source in the 6th century. Procopius, he wrote about the Heruls, the Heruli, which is many people believe that the name Earl, as in Norway, Jarl, originated with them, and there are a lot of rune inscription which has this Ek Erularen, which means either rune master, but it's with magic. There's something there on the roots of Earl, the word Earl. But the Heruli, we know they went up to Scandinavia, meaning across the waters, like you talked, the Scandinavian peninsula. And they got a new king because they lived then on the Balkans. We don't know where, but maybe in present-day Croatia or Bosnia or Serbia. And they had to go up to Scandinavia for some reason to get a king of the proper royal line. And the cool thing about this source, which is almost contemporary, it's like 20 years after, is that when they came down to present-day Germany, this person that they have chosen to come down to the Balkans as their king, he died. And then they turned around, went up across the sea and fetched his brother. And that's how important it was. And this was in this almost the mid-6th century, 2 centuries or more after they left Scandinavia. So you see, there's been a lot of, I think, you know, Tom, when I did my master's degree, it's a long time ago, but it was quite a different time then, especially in terms of DNA. I was not allowed to talk about or write about DNA. I was not allowed to. Vikings were like, we're not supposed to talk about Vikings. We talk about poor people in present day, not Vikings long time ago. And then the
similar
third thing they said,
similar for me. There's certain things off topic, like DNA was just starting to come to the table when I did my masters, and Indo-Europeans were still off the table. But that's thankfully changed.
And the thing is, I wasn't allowed to talk about trade or discuss trade or have trade as because that was capitalism. I mean, this is seriously biased in terms of ideology. You know, you can't even write about capitalism, of course. But if you use the word trade in the Iron Age, for example, well, it wasn't allowed before. But now we can do that, and we see so much more. And we see that, like you talked about in your video, the strange Swedish connection to Sutton Hoo and the Anglo-Saxons. And many people might find that weird. For me, it's pretty logical. If you look on the map of Scandinavia on Wikipedia, they have a pretty good map from the history of Scandinavia, where you see the power, the richest areas, or the power areas. And you've been in Sweden quite a lot, Tom. But have you been up north? Close to
I didn't live in the Arctic part. The part I lived in was Uppsala, and I used to live exactly in the area where the burials, the ship burials, and the equivalent Vendel era helmets that are compared to Sutton Hoo came from. So I've looked at them, but it does seem interesting to hear what you're saying about the geography, because the problem is that this is on the eastern side of central Sweden, and you've got then Anglo-Saxon England, and then there's like, at the time that people were, you know, in the first half of the 20th century, there wasn't any understanding of why there weren't things like that in Denmark and Norway that were parallel, because it doesn't make sense for this Anglo-Saxon connection to eastern Sweden. But
so there are two things here that it doesn't take long. I'll explain it very easily. First of all, they talk about only 5% Norwegian and Swedish contribution to the Saxon Iron Age. Well, that's why they call it, what is it, CN? How do you say
CNE? CNE means Nordic, basically, like Northern European.
Yeah, but continental, right? In Norway, that's sort of like the continent. We call Denmark the continent, right?
I know, because you have the same trend as we do in Britain. We refer to Europe as the continent. Because actually, historically, Scandinavia was regarded as an island like Britain. Skansa was thought to be an island because most people didn't know about the Lapps connecting up with Russia and everything, so it was too far north. So I mean, it does change.
So the two things. First off, the easiest one is there was a bias, and in the Viking paper that I was in, there was a bias because it's so difficult to do DNA extractions of skeleton material in Norway. We have a lot of old skeletons, but some of the old far up north. Can I do this? Yeah, up here in the Arctic. All of that is labeled Sami, almost all of that, which means we can't touch it, basically.
There's specific laws to protect Sami heritage that prevents you from looking at skeletons from the north of Norway.
So even though we have some good papers from Estonia and Finland that talk about the arrival of the Estonians, the Finnish, and the Sami, and the Kven, and all of those men, mostly men, from the east, about 2,000 or maybe 3,000 years ago, when you had this catastrophe happening, the fall of the Bronze Age collapse, I mean. Around that time, they came to the Baltic and then slowly went up north to northern Norway. But they married with the local women, right? So a lot of people say, oh, they're not indigenous. But that's also wrong, because the Sami people married into the local with the local women who had been up north as Scandinavian hunter-gatherers for thousands and thousands of years, for 10,000 years even. So of course they're indigenous on the mother's side.
May I interject? But if
Sure.
if having ancestry from indigenous hunter-gatherers makes them indigenous, then so that also makes everyone else in Scandinavia indigenous, doesn't it?
Of course.
So it wouldn't make them uniquely indigenous. But
no, not at all. Yeah, but
also,
it's interesting that in Norway,
if they found a barrow, it's typically Norse barrow in the northern part of Norway. Does it still prevent it from excavation because of Sami protections, even though it's quite clearly not a Sami burial?
This is difficult because the further north you get in these issues, the more feelings there are. And I wrote this article about Sami people and DNA, and I thought I was going to be flogged publicly, just showing myself up north after writing that article. But it went quite all right because I kept a female perspective. I talked about it doesn't matter with these men who came 2,000 years ago and became Sami, because you are locked in a patrilineal way of thinking. If you think about the women, there's a much bigger story going in further back in time, and we know much more about them. And that kind of changed the angle a little bit. And a lot of people up north was happy for that, because then it turns out that we're all indigenous.
But I know people watching this video will be well aware that the Norse had a patriarchal Indo-European culture, but I think they might not be aware that, as far as aware, Sami were very patriarchal too, and that in the tents there was a specific area.
Absolutely.
Women had to be on one side of the tent and the men on another, and it wasn't permitted for women to go on the men's side of their tent. Or is that correct? Or am I?
I'd like to, I don't know too much about that. I have to be honest. I'm not. I've never even been in a lavvo, actually.
I'd like to know more about Sami culture personally. If anyone is an expert and they want to come on Jive Talk and educate me, then you're most welcome to. Anyway, as you were saying,
those two things. So it turns out it's really difficult. It's been difficult for a number of years. You have an ethical committee in Norway, not in any other country. All the ethics are in each institution, right? But in Norway, we have an ethical committee, and before they even had to have a priest there to decide and help understand if this is good to do DNA on these old, we're talking thousands of years old. There's even a skull which is up north in Finnmark, that's 4,500 years, and it would be so interesting to check this DNA, and that's not labeled Sami, actually. And what we probably could do with this one is to prove this female connection with Sami people, to even prove the long back indigenousy that they have going 10,000 years back. But it's just too touchy. It's too difficult, and that's what a lot of geneticists have experienced. And people are just, they just stay away from Norway. And in the big Viking paper that I was here before and talked with you about, we got a lot of views on that. Did you see that? There's a lot of people have been watching these two videos. That's pretty cool. But then we talked about the bias in Sweden also, because in Copenhagen, the DNA lab there competes so much with the DNA lab in Uppsala and Stockholm. And they got like different turfs, right? So they're not able to get DNA, good representation in all of Sweden, just down south and southwest. And in Norway, you didn't get anything on the coast of Norway, where most of the Vikings, on the side here, where most of the Vikings went out, there's no samples there. So, of course, you can't conclude a lot on the Vikings of Sweden and Norway because of that. And that's sort of the fallout we had, because Eske Willerslev said that there wasn't any Vikings in Norway, and he said Norway was a rotten banana. And you can ask Danish people what that means. But that's the same thing goes when you talked about in your last video about this 5% Swedish or Norwegian. Because you need more samples, basically, from up north.
What it said in this Anglo-Saxon paper that came out this week, it said that most of the Anglo-Saxon DNA, they reckon, came from Denmark and Germany, and only about 5% from Sweden and Norway. That's the actual Scandinavian peninsula, formerly considered an island. But that went up in the Viking Age to 30%, indicating that the Vikings were much more from Sweden and Norway than the Anglo-Saxons were. Very interesting stuff
Yeah,
coming
yeah.
out.
So I believe if when we have more samples, and especially from Norway, and that was also the Allentoft paper in May that we are also going to talk about. They really lack a lot of samples, and especially I'm still on the one topic now. The other topic is trade. But if you look on Norway here on the back here, if you stand, this is where I live, like in the Western Fjords. You can hear me okay now, right? Yeah. Because most people don't realize this who are not Norwegians from the coast. We've had boats up here for 9,000 years, 50 kilometers out into the open sea for 9,000 years. That's
I
kind
know
of...
there's corded word burials right up in the Arctic Circle. So the Indo-European, the first lot of Indo-Europeans to enter Scandinavia went right up into,
Yeah. But I'm talking
talking.
much further back in time than the Indo-Europeans. I mean, we're talking the Scandinavian hunter-gatherers even 9,000 years ago in the open sea with boats to hunt for seal. And if you stand right here where my mother is from, actually, and I was there with Thor Heyerdahl one time, this Norwegian explorer, and he was so good at explaining geography, how important geography is.
Wow,
because if you stand here outside where I live and you look towards England or Scotland, sorry, towards the UK, to Vikings, that was like a highway, and that's what Thor Heyerdahl always said. The oceans are never a barrier; it's a highway. And I've sailed from here down to Shetland. That's only if you sail in the morning, you're there the next afternoon. It's really short. It's easy, and then you can sail around Cape Wrath, down the Hebrides, and you're in the Irish Sea. And we're getting to this, Tom, because it's very, very interesting that in Scandinavia there's a lot to trade with, and there's always been not just amber, but especially up north with all the sea mammals,
furs and ivory, walrus ivory.
Really, really important. Pytheas, that I think it was Roman in the year 300 BC. He went from Marseille in France up to see the midnight sun because he wanted to see where all the trading goods came from. So that says something about why he wanted to go up there, right? And that's early Iron Age. But in the Bronze Age, we're starting now to see why in Norway there's so much. Do you say Celtic or Celtic DNA? Celtic. Okay. There's so much Celtic DNA down in the southwest of Norway. I mean, a lot.
And that came out in that Viking paper you were involved in, didn't it?
Yeah.
It was pre-Anglo-Saxon British DNA they referred to it as, and that was very interesting because that couldn't have been brought over from the Vikings then. It must have come over much earlier.
Yeah, and probably it started even in the Bronze Age because of the bronze that you need to have tin from that you got in Cornwall, right, in England. And you had the big copper mines were in Austria and some in Italy and Spain, and you needed to have these huge trading networks. And
it's interesting that in the British Bronze Age, as soon as around the same time the tin starts being mined, around the Beaker folk arriving 2,400 BC, is exactly the same time when amber starts to show up in Britain. So it's like the whole thing of mining tin and exporting it coincides with the arrival of foreign goods, Egyptian beads, Scandinavian amber, all kinds of stuff connected everything up in those days.
And in Norway, we needed tin, of course, for the bronze. So, of course, they travel the same way down there. And that's sort of like a bias I see among many both geneticists and archaeologists who forget about this road, this highway coming down Scotland from that side with all these trading goods. And the second thing I was going to talk about was how important trade was in the Iron Age. And what a lot of people don't think too much about this discontinuity in history that we have in the 6th century. In Norway, we call it the Fimbulvinter because of this catastrophe, the 2 volcanoes in the year about 536. And then you had the plague in the year 541, right? But these were recurrent. The plague were recurrent for more than 100 years. And also this winter, we see in Norway, there are a lot of farms that became desolated in the 6th century. and a lot of the archaeology changes also in the 6th century. But the most important thing is that the trade went the richest area in Sweden in the Roman period was up north in Sweden, up to where Sundsvall is, and just like in Norway, you have the Ladejarl, the earls from the north, who came down and eventually ended up as earls of Northumbria, the son of Håkon Jarl, if you've seen the latest Viking spin-off.
I haven't seen it, but I know who the real guy is.
Yeah,
the
that's
hero.
The one. But they came from the north, and because they had all the trading routes going really far up. And you know how far north this is? I mean, this is, if you turn the globe around, this is in Antarctica, right? It's really, really far north, but they had all these trading goods. And the thing is, it's so dangerous to sail out, just out here. There are two oceans who meet here, the Norwegian Sea and the North Sea. They meet exactly here because the geography, the way Norway is shaped. So what they did was, in the Iron Age, when they came close to Trondheim, on this place called Værnes, there's a place called Frostating. That's where we had a giant thing going really far back in time. When they came down with all these trading goods, instead of taking a dangerous road on the outside down towards Denmark and present-day England, they went east, and they connected. Because if you go up here, it's just one valley, and then you have rivers and lakes down to Sundsvall. This was called Högom och Forsa in Swedish. It's very strong culture. And those rulers there are the ones who went down into Uppsala, who are in the mountains in Uppsala, actually. So I've read people, I think archaeologists who see so many similarities, that they also, just like in Norway, they came down. And this has to do with trade and power. They control the trading routes. And with all this iron, we became self-sufficient in iron 2,000 years ago. And it was warm. A lot of people were born and grew up. Of course, when you have weapons and everything, you start this exodus almost out of Scandinavia. But in regards to trade, the trade went down here, because here the most important trading good was, of course, amber. Lots of amber all over here, and there were amber routes going down to the Roman Empire, but also down to the Black Sea, because the main valley they used was the Vistula, down to present-day Warsaw. And there, after Warsaw, the river splits. One goes to Lviv and into Ukraine and down to the Black Sea, and the other one goes down the Moravian Gate, which was a very important trading route down to the Roman Empire. So the thing is, this discontinuity in history with trade diminishing, and lots of people dying in the 6th century. So in the early 700s, when trade really started to pick up again, then we had sails, right? Our ancestors had sails. So they could take all these trading goods, and now instead of going this way, they went down this way. And why? Because the Franks have gotten powerful. So first it was the Merovingians. We call it the Merovingian period in Norway, because all the trade started going towards east. Of course, because all the settlements and the Anglo-Saxons in England as well, of course. So there was a whole new direction in the 7th and especially the 8th century, going much more focused eastwards. But in the Iron Age, the focus was straight down present-day Poland with all these trading goods. And a lot of people forget that they even have oil up in Norway. There are thousands of... They made a hole in the ground and put stones in the bottom, and they took these sea mammals and just grilled them, or not grill, I don't know. They put fire on them, and if you do that long enough, it turns into oil, and then you can take it off and you can travel with it without it being liquid, because afterwards it becomes a very easily commodity. And they used to, it's in Norwegian, it's called grakse. And they used to do this. It was very, very valuable, that as well. So there's so many valuable things that came down here.
Yeah.
And so this is the connection between the Swedish royalty at the time of Beowulf, and of course they're very, very rich. and they expanded towards Denmark in that direction. So I believe once we get more material from the north of Sweden and the north of Norway, we might actually see a higher percentage than 5, as you mentioned in your video, from the paper. That is.
That would be very interesting. I hope there will be more from up north as well in time. If not from Norway, then Sweden at least, or Finland perhaps. But that would be great. But now I think in the second half of the stream we should get back onto the topic of the origin of the Scandinavian people, the Nordic people, specifically North Germanic people, and the Germanic people, in fact, because I think at the earliest days there's no such distinction of North Germanic and West Germanic. It's just Germanic, and it's centered in southern Scandinavia. And of course, how our paternal lineage, our shared paternal lineage, because probably we have the same paternal ancestor. It might be just one man who every I1 descends from. If not one man, then a very few numbers of
few, I would say. Probably not one. That sounds ridiculous. But it was one originally, going even further back in time, of course.
Yeah, who knows? But it's so mysterious because we don't see any Mesolithic samples with I1. We don't see hardly any in the Neolithic. But we find other things that like ancestral to I1, but then suddenly I1 explodes in Bronze Age. And I'll just you sent me from the UK Biobank. I'll just get this up on screen now.
This is cool. This is really cool.
This is the distribution of I1 in Great Britain and some of the other islands of the British Isles, but not all of them. Here in Dorset, I think that is. There's a high concentration.
Present-day English people, right?
Yeah, this is modern English people. Dorset, parts of East Anglia. I'm going to guess my I1 is going to come from this one down in Dorset because I got a lot of West Country. My origin, paternal origins, is from this part of the country, and that's I1 as well for my family. So, and up here, I'm going to guess this is mostly Viking mediated up in the north where it's come in there. But the new Anglo-Saxon paper says I1. They only detect I1 after the Anglo-Saxon arrivals, but most of the I1 in the UK is going to come from Vikings and Anglo-Saxons and Normans. But I'll let you take over now and just tell.
I have some thoughts on that.
The link between the beginning of the Germanic culture and the rise of I1.
Yeah. Do you have? Is it possible to bring up that map of the I1 from the UK bank? This is present day men in England, and there are thousands, I think, and they have this for all the different haplogroups. And if you could zoom, that's perfect. So you see the Wirral. Close to Wales and Liverpool. Yeah. Can you point that out? Yeah, there we go. So and you have Liverpool down there, and you have the Wirral, which you have lots of Vikings there. And there was this research paper 10 years ago from the university in Oslo. They checked out that they thought it was unfair with all this focus around Yorkshire and the eastern part of northern England. And northerners in England, they're quite special, right? They have a special culture, like
it's a bit like the northern culture in Scandinavia because it's more associated with industry. So, like North Sweden is very industrial, and North England is also the industrial region.
Yeah, and this paper I talked about 10 years ago it was mostly about linguistics. They looked a lot about place names, but they also did some simple DNA haplogroups from people who were from Liverpool and the area around. From before the industrial age, you could trace who were not Irish or other people who came during the industrial age, the urbanization, so to say. And there I found a really, really high percentage of people who had some Norse DNA. But what we need to know is that a lot of the people who came down south on the left side of Scotland, as you see here, this is the highway that I talked about. The Vikings who came down here, they intermarried so much with the Scottish clans because the Vikings had clans as well, right? So they're very into the clan culture. So among contemporary sources, they were called Norse Gaels. I mean, they married so much into it. This is crazy. And the same thing, I think this high colors, the light colors that you have around Northwest is actually mostly Viking, I'm sure. from this time period when so many people settled on this place. I mean, we know the Vikings around the Irish Sea, if they had trouble in Dublin or the other 4 places in Ireland where they had settlements, they just traveled to another place. You know, they always did the least opposition where it was easiest to travel. And they tried in 902, I think they tried to settle at Anglesey in present-day Wales.
But Northern Wales, yeah,
it wasn't possible. So they went on into the Wirral and Liverpool and even into Cumbria, apparently. But I see from this
they
map
settled all the islands around Britain. Lundy in south of Wales and north of Devon was a Viking stop off.
Yeah.
Up in the north of Scotland, the Hebrides and the Orkneys were very famously the Orkney Lorcadians today have some of the most specifically Viking era DNA of any people in the British Isles, as well. The Vikings like islands for obvious reasons, because they can set up camp without being bothered by too many people, and they can easily escape on their boats when they need to.
Yeah. It's this flexibility, which is a inheritance really from the old times. That could be so dynamic, and of course we can use the I1 haplogroup as a marker. But the Vikings were not all I1, of course. I mean, they were mixed so much. And that's the really cool thing. And I'll share with you now, or I have shared with you earlier today, but I'll share with the people, all of you viewing this now. I work a little closely with Family Tree DNA, this DNA provider. I think it's kind of cool to use modern samples and look at things also. Like we talked about this Etruscan paper in Italy. And that's the middle of Italy. It's not Lombardy, where we know there are a lot of Normans, right? But only around Rome and southwards, but in the middle of Italy, we see today close to 20% of I1 haplogroup. And that's crazy. It's in the DNA paper about Etruscans.
And that's not from the old Etruscans, is it? It's something that came much later.
Well, we know a lot of people from once this mix had occurred and that's where we're getting now, right? With the Scandinavian hunter-gatherers and the warriors, the Yamnaya. Once this mixed happened, and you didn't have a population turnover, that's what I'm going to mention now. We have some percentages that they use at Family Tree DNA to see how much, not in haplogroups, because that's straight paternal line or straight maternal line, right? So you don't have all that in between, right? 2 parents, 4, 8, 16, 32. So if you go 1,000 years back, it's 1 billion people, mathematically. But the percentage today of modern day Norwegians who have autosomal, we call it. Do you say that? Autosomal? How do you say that in English?
Autosomal, I think.
Yeah. So that's like a percentage of all your DNA, right? And it's so high. It's 42% in Denmark, present-day Danish people. It's close to 50% in Sweden, and 49 or 48 or something. I can't remember what I sent you, Tom, but it's about there. It's close to 50% Scandinavian hunter-gatherer in present-day Scandinavians. If you look at all the DNA. And this we didn't know until recently. And what's interesting in this Allentoft paper in May, where they look at, a lot of things, but they look at the Germanic tribes, right? They see for the first time a complete population turnover. This is the paper, yeah. A complete population turnover among the men, twice in about 1,000 years in present-day Denmark and southern Sweden. And that's crazy. So that means that you talked about this in your videos, how these Indo-Europeans, the Yamnaya, came into Europe, and we have a DNA paper from Spain, which is really good. 100% of all men who were hunters among the hunter-gatherers died out. The DNA didn't survive for some reason. It could have been plague, but it was a very violent time, right? And on the British Isles, the number was 90% in this other DNA paper I saw, but that's 2-3 years back. I don't know, are they talking now a complete population turnover? I mean, we're talking about the people who built Stonehenge around, for example. But not so, and then this paper now in May says they even see that in the flat land of Denmark, you see a complete population turnover. All the men died, and they even see a bottleneck of the haplogroup I1 going north. And they know not about this bottleneck for some years, meaning that very few people have survived but then they were able to expand by having a lot of descendants. And think about this just for a moment. And to all you Danish people, are there any Danish people? I'm looking at the chat now.
Probably, yeah.
Because this would mean that all the men who were hunter-gatherers in Denmark died out and were replaced. But now, today, the percentage is 42 of people who have Scandinavian hunter-gatherer, or hunter-gatherer, that is, in themselves among the Danes.
But it might not be it might be not be SHG. It might be WHG or EHG from other sources. You're saying,
yes.
So all these different European hunter-gatherers are closely related.
Yeah.
Well, by that stage, Scandinavian hunter-gatherers, for those who the listeners aren't aware, are a mixture of Western European and Eastern European hunter-gatherers, and those both went into Scandinavia and mixed to become a unique, well, not that unique because they also existed in the Baltic, but a specific regional variant of European hunter-gatherer called Scandinavian. But yeah, sorry, carry on.
And what we don't know so much about are the Eastern hunter-gatherers. We know they were tall, and we know they had this one gene of the two genes for fair skin, and that gave them an advantage. And that's where you have the bottleneck, because they were very good warriors, obviously, and good hunters, and they were very adaptable, but they had a mobility which was insane, which a lot of people had. So they were able to, run away, basically. But what they did was, when all these people, these men died out in Denmark and southern Sweden, they did the only sensible thing to go up north. And there they had, by this time...
There was when the Indo-European battle axe culture came in, there was the pitted wear culture was extremely dominant, but it hadn't been until recently, because the hunter-gatherers had formerly been pushed to the periphery of Scandinavia by the TBK, like by Anatolian-derived farmers.
The farmers,
Neolithic farmers.
But we also
they then had a resurgence, and then the hunter-gatherer DNA was suddenly dominant again in Scandinavia. But then the Indo-Europeans came.
Exactly. But what happened in that first, because they mixed, right? A lot of these farmers, they had the other gene. There are two genes, like for fair skin, that gives a great advantage up north in Norway, because it's so far up north. And mind you, for those of you who don't know this is all about D vitamin. I mean, you can't survive up north if you don't have the fair skin and those two genes, or one gene, the Eastern hunter-gatherer gene, at least. That's the most important of the two genes. You can't survive this far up north. You will die.
Not on a diet involved, a farm-based diet. Certainly.
Well, it's not just a diet. You have to have fair skin addition or else. That's what we tell people with darker skin who come up north in Norway. You got to take that D vitamin, man, or you'll die.
Yeah, but I just want to point out that many of these Siberian peoples have dark skin and survive okay in the Arctic regions. That's because true. They do get vitamin D from diet. It is possible if you eat a lot of fish and sea stuff, then you can get all your D from that. But once you start having things like, bread and vegetables, growing food, you need to make your skin get lighter, because you need to absorb some of your vitamin D from the sun, because you're not getting it elsewhere. But before we're running out of time, I need to just quickly do some of the super chats. One from Nordhuger. Thank you very much for your kind compliment and donation. And there's a question from Liquid Oxygen, who's one of my patrons. He asks, if I1 is not associated with Indo-Europeans, why did the Indo-European pre-Germanic people, I think the first Indo-European culture in Scandinavia to have any I1 in is the battle axe culture, but it wasn't common in the battle axe culture. It didn't become common until the Nordic Bronze Age afterwards. But anyway, why did the Indo-European people accept a king with a foreign lineage? Surely this would have required the displacement of the kingly line already ruling them. Any theories? Do you want to answer that?
This is mentioned in the Allentoft paper, actually. They talk about grave goods, and they see that two of the richest grave goods they have from the Bronze Age, or maybe it was just before the Bronze Age started, are actually I1 haplogroup, both of them. And that's in the Bronze Age. And that is a strong indication that the elite was local and not Indo-European. But there was a mix here. Now, I personally, Tom, I think all these disasters that we had, catastrophes, 3,200 years ago, at the fall, the decline of the fall of the Bronze Age, the collapse. I mean, it's always plague and climate change together. There's probably a mix there together. But the same thing in the 6th century also. And this there was so much devastation. But what we see afterwards, just like in the Black Plague, after the Black Plague, which is also recurrent for many decades, we see that language change a lot and people mix a lot. And the hierarchies become different and new ones and new trading routes even. Like in your English language, Tom, a house and a boat 600 years ago was hus and båt, just like in Norway, right?
Yeah.
But then you got the diphthongs because of the Black Plague. And the same with the Justinian plague and the Fimbulwinter in the 6th century. That's when you see that the Norse written language, the runic inscriptions, went from the elder Futhark to the younger Futhark. There was great changes here, these language shifts. But of course, people mix differently. And I think this is a key to understanding and reading the past, trying to see this through this distorted glass and put the puzzles together on the other side. And I think these, in our oldest memories that have been written down for us, I think they are also trying to see past, just like watching through distorted glass twice over. You know, you have the 6th century and then you have 3,200 years ago. And because we're talking the Bronze Age here, that elite people in southern Sweden who were suddenly I1 again, it was 0%, but then it turned into 100%. No, did I say 100? 42 today, which is amazingly, and which basically means that all Danish men descend from Norwegians. Did you hear that, Tom? All Danish, did I say that out loud? Well, not all Danish men, of course, but those who were Scandinavian hunter-gatherers. And that's kind of cool to think of. And Tom got disconnected. Does that mean that I'm running the show here now? I guess you can see me now. And yeah, then I can check out the chat here. Did Scandinavia have cheese as an early human winter fodder? Well, this has to do with what we see, the strongest driver for selection that we have for 1,000 years. I talk about this on my own YouTube. Hello, Tom. I'm just
sorry about that one.
Here.
Okay, thanks for picking up the ball there.
The strongest driver for selection. I talk with this on my own YouTube channel, Viking Stories, with Johannes Krause, this geneticist in Germany. And we talked about the strongest driver for natural selection, which is lactose tolerance. So, of course, milk got into, and of course, cheese then also got into the diet, which is, I guess, very important. Yeah. So, you decide now. We have 8 minutes about left. What do you want to talk about, Tom?
I can add something interesting, that the Scandinavian love of preserved fish goes back at least 9,000 years, because they found in the hunter-gatherer times that they had, fermented preserved fish. Even in that stage, they have evidence of that being done. So, if you ever get to try seal or surströmming or whatever, one of these preserved fish things, and you know how it's an ancient tradition.
Iceland, the fermented shark.
I haven't had the pleasure, but maybe when I go there.
No, you have to drink it with liquor, the local liquor, which is called svarta devdir, which means the black death. Then it goes down. Or
I've drunk with Icelanders before, and I can see why they refer to it as death, because they'd like to drink. So then,
sorry.
Can we talk a bit about, because the complicated scenarios that emerged with the dagger culture and the Nordic Bronze Age and the Jarstov culture, like it seemed, because it's not. I used to think that the Indo-European battle axe culture, corded ware culture, coming into Scandinavia brings the Indo-European culture to Scandinavia, and that eventually becomes Germanic culture. But now what I understand is that is not really looking like what happens, because afterwards there's another migration of a neighboring Indo-European people from the continent into Denmark, and this may be, it may be that either that culture or a combination of the existing both battle axe culture, Scandinavia, and this one.
Yeah,
combined.
That's what we see. Something happened there for hundreds and hundreds of years. You didn't have the population turnover and mass death of men, of hunters, like in the rest of Europe. We know that a lot of the Western hunter-gatherers, some of them turned to farming, actually. But the Eastern hunter-gatherers, those are the interesting ones. And I think this is where we maybe differ a little bit on our opinion here, because I find a connection which is, with science, you should always doubt what you speculate on, right? So I have doubts about this, all right?
Okay.
But what I think is that I1 might be from the Eastern hunter-gatherers. We know they were tall, which is kind of strange this far up north. And when they came 10,000 years ago into Scandinavia, there was an ice sheet over the Baltic Sea and present day, lots of present day Finland and Sweden. So they came down the Norwegian coast, and there they met the Western hunter-gatherers. And these people lived apparently peaceful, because we know they mixed a lot and turned into Scandinavian hunter-gatherers. And when you were off now, I actually managed to say that if all the men died out in Denmark, and today Denmark has 42% autosomal Scandinavian hunter-gatherer DNA in them, and a lot of I1, which it means that Denmark was actually colonized from the north, because these people in their bottleneck went up, and then they came down to Denmark again eventually in the Iron Age, probably.
Somehow we've got to explain, and liquid oxygen was getting there, like the early Germanic culture, and it continues in the Viking Age. You've got R1A, which is obviously the battle axe. You've got R1B, which probably comes from bell beakers, and you've got I1 maybe from Eastern hunter-gatherers, maybe from Scandinavian hunter-gatherers. Who knows? It's mysterious still. But the I1 had already penetrated the battle axe culture prior to the arrival of this R1B stuff from bell beakers. So there's some mixing is creating the Germanic culture. And as far as I can see, the earliest proper I1 they got is like 4,000 years ago or something. But there's pre-I1 from 6,000 BC that you talked about in an article, which is very interesting. So it's not a proper I1, but it's a hunter-gatherer with a lineage of I that is ancestral to I1 and could be an indication.
And we know another thing about this, because I1, we know they were tall, right? And this Swedish sample that you talked about, that's so old, the average height on this skeleton, on the skeletons that we have found, is 181 centimeters, which is really, really gigantic compared to the rest of Europe at that time. You remember
the Western hunter-gatherers weren't very tall.
No, not at all.
The ones that in like the Cheddar Man and things. And a lot of people mistakenly think that because most of the Western hunter-gatherers had I2, which is obviously a related lineage, that therefore I1 comes from Western hunter-gatherers as well. But there's no proof of that yet. So we can't assume that until we find some evidence, but it's possible as well. But yeah, I mean, the Scandinavian hunter-gatherers were taller, you say, than the Western hunter-gatherers.
Yes, much taller. And I think this is why you find in the Sami population, you find a lot of Basque DNA. And this was really peculiar. I talked to Spencer Wells. We were in Morocco in the Atlas Mountains together 13 years ago. Spencer Wells was the first geneticist to work for the National Geographic. He had the Genographic project, and
he discovered Homo naledi, didn't he? Was he not the discoverer of Homo naledi? Yeah,
sure. And he speculated so much. Why do Sami people up north have so much Basque DNA? But now we know it's Western hunter-gatherer DNA. And they were small, and we know that the Sami and the Finns and Estonians, before they became that, were also small. So there maybe they found equal small Western hunter-gatherers who were not Scandinavian hunter-gatherers tall. I don't know. There are many new things that can come out there, and maybe I should leave you with a food for thought, Tom. Because
well, that's also my maternal lineage, U5, my WHG.
Yeah, that's mine too.
Well, double shared haplogroups. You've got the same mum and the same dad long ago. A very little dark WHG mum and a mysterious unknown I1 father somewhere along the line. But
I'll leave you with some food for thought here, because the thing is, now that we know that unlike many other places in Europe, those places where Germanic tribes have settled, or in Scandinavia, or Vikings and Normans, or Rus Vikings, we know that they have a lot of Eastern hunter-gatherer or Scandinavian hunter-gatherer in their DNA. And then my question to you is, we see in Norway, we have a little bit of a special society in Norway. We have a very, very good faith in law and order, and trust, tillit, we call it in Norway, is so important that in Sweden and Norway, we have a word that's called stupid nice. We're so nice, we're stupid, and people can take advantage of us, which happens a lot. And especially conformity. We call it conformity pressure. It's so strong. But my question to you, I think geography decides a lot about our genes, which genes survive. So you can imagine, we know from the archaeology that the Eastern hunter-gatherers who came down the Norwegian coast line, I'm not going to try to do that even, we know that they were more advanced than the Western hunter-gatherers. They had more advanced hunting equipment. And we also know, yes, and we also know that they had to not just be advanced, but they had to collaborate on a whole different level. Everyone had to collaborate and drag in the same direction. If one person did something egoistic, he could kill everyone else because it's so far north. It's in the Antarctic, if you turn the globe around. And because the sun disappears so much. So it's very extreme to survive that far north. You got to collaborate. So I've launched this theory this week in Norway, which angered a lot of archaeologists, because I'm sort of like talking about, have we learned something about collaboration and sharing from 8,000 years in Norway among the hunter-gatherers before other peoples arrived. And now we know that we have so much in our DNA, close to 50%. Does that mean I'm more prone to collaboration and not just to be a warrior? Because I was like you, Tom, and I know you were very focused on the Indo-Europeans some years back when DNA started to become popular. And I was like this too. I was very curious when I took my DNA test to see maybe I'm R1A or something, and then I was, I'm only hunter. But the story about hunter-gatherers, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there that we can find out in the coming years, such as, are we more prone to being so stupid that we're just too nice to be taken advantage of? I mean,
the intersection of archaeogenetics and behavioral genetics, that isn't really done. Behavioral genetics is also advancing at a very interesting rate. I recommend the book by Robert Plomin on behavioral genetics called Blueprint. But once the two meet, and we'll get some really interesting conclusions. But before we go, I'd like to just give you a quick opportunity to tell everyone where they can find out more about what you're up to, and if you want to tell us about any projects that you're working on that we should look out for in the future.
Oh, yes, I'd love to do that. I'm going to take up something here now. I have this YouTube channel then, which is called Viking Stories, which you can see here. And thanks if you're watching this and want to subscribe. I know a lot of people from Survive the Jive have come over to my channel. I have had the pleasure of being cancelled with accusations of racism and a lot of different things. 9 times people have tried to cancel me, actually, Tom, which is quite unique. And I haven't survived all of that. So that means that I'm not able to live working as a scientist solely. So it's made life rather awkward. So I appreciate all the people who have been supporting me on my YouTube channel. I think maybe Tom disappeared again, so that means I'm all alone now with you guys.
No, I'm still here. I just gave you full screen there to
I see.
Focus on you.
So, but the thing is, Tom, I got a lot of research done. I'm a co-author on a lot of papers, and even on this paper with Allentoft, I contributed with a lot of skeleton material from Kazakhstan. I have a lot of things to talk about, and I see now with all this proof coming out, like the Germanic tribes coming out of Scandinavia, and all we know now about the Scandinavian hunter-gatherers. And I know a lot of the DNA papers that are coming in the next few years. We'll find out so much more, Tom. And it's really, really cool. So I try to tell a story there. And for all you people who understand Norwegian, or if you can use if you can use Google Translate. This week, I put in the chat here now, I wrote a article telling the big story about the people of the north of Norway, because the politicians in Oslo, just like in Sweden, they haven't cared too much about the north. But then they forget about all the there we are. That's the article I wrote. The big story about northerners, and that's not northerners in England, although it's a lot of similarities. And I talk about the Yamna coming in. I talk about how it's weird that all these Scandinavian hunter-gatherers, or the hunters, survived. And I ask, as a hypothesis, have we inherited some of them? And that's sort of like what I write on. And I'm also in a lot of podcasts at the moment in Norway, and some in England also, international in English. So it's easy. But I think basically if you go on Facebook and follow Viking Stories there, or on my YouTube channel, that's the easiest way to follow. Or check out the link I sent you there from the Nordnorsk Debatt, for all you who understand Norwegian. You can see the latest from 2 days back, I think. It costed a lot of angry archaeologists, but also a lot of other archaeologists and other academics praised me for being courageous and asking questions and keeping the fiction and the science apart. Although some people say I didn't do that, but anyway, doesn't matter.
Well, I'll add a link after the stream's finished to your Viking Stories channel, and I do urge everyone to go and subscribe to Sturla. Check out some of his old content. He's got some great videos up there. It's very interesting stuff being discussed. And before I say goodbye, somebody has done a chat after the end.
Oh, did you disappear now? I wish I could. Oh, there you are. I wish I could let you know what you were going to say there, but I didn't know. But now I see you're coming back here now. You're
I'm back again.
Hard. Oh, there you are. Let's try it again. Go ahead.
I don't know what happened. My camera had another spaz, but yeah, just before I go, he asked, is Native American DNA found in Iceland? I don't know about that. I think they found some like Eskimo DNA, a very trace amount.
No. I can answer that actually. It's very easily. We know that one woman apparently came back from who was Native American. Some Greenlanders probably took this woman back to.
Greenlanders are not; those are Inuit, though, aren't they? The Greenlanders.
No.
They're not Beothuk, is it? The Beothuk is from.
They are probably from Canada, actually.
So they're not from Greenland.
No.
So then could be Beothuk. That's the ones from where Vinland were, I think.
Yeah, there's this paper by this woman, a very famous Icelandic genealogist. She's actually quite good. But she also claimed that Danish and Norwegians today are more Viking than Icelanders because of all the mutations they've had living on a small island.
But they want to ask specifically, can that be used to look how far south the Norse went in America? But the answer to that would rely on, we'd need to find ancient samples from Native Americans, because modern Native Americans, I don't think it would be very useful because they already all have European DNA from the last 400 or 500 years. So it would be hard to distinguish something.
Although we do have paintings in Peru, I think, of people with beards and who are fair-skinned, and those Native Americans there, they didn't have beards, so that's kind of interesting. Tor Heyerdahl talked a lot about that.
That's worth thinking about. But yeah, if they found a skeleton of a Native American further south in America, and they were given permission by the local tribe to analyze that DNA, and they found Norse DNA, then that would certainly be confirmation that they went further south. But I don't think that's very likely to happen because there's quite a lot of difficulties, legal red tape there. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us.
Sorry, Tom, I just got to say one thing. Abiram, you said Inuit is technically Native American. Yes, of course. I didn't mean to say that Inuit was not Native American. But I think it's worth distinguishing because the Inuit are distinct from other Native Americans. Right.
They came in later. They're from a different migration. They speak a different language group. So I think it's worth distinguishing the Inuit from other Native Americans anyway. But sorry for that confusion. I thought that signal in Iceland was Inuit, not the other Native Americans. But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you as you're always, Sturla. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I see you've taken a fag. Is that how you say it in English? It's so smoky with you.
Yeah, it's very smoky. No, this is the camera problems, I'm afraid. So I'll just have to end the stream now.
All right.
All right.
Well,
Goodbye.
it was a pleasure. Take care, everyone, and thanks a lot.